My name is Maya Castellanos, and I'm 31 years old. Last Christmas Eve, my father stood in front of 42 relatives and publicly disowned me because I dared to question what my grandmother left me in her will. The entire ballroom erupted in laughter. My face burned so intensely I thought I might faint right there on the marble floor. But I held my ground, looked him straight in the eye, and said just 2 words, "Watch me." The next morning, he barged into my hotel suite, expecting to find me broken and apologetic. Instead, he found an empty room, no luggage, no note, no trace of me. Before he could process what was happening, his phone rang. It was the family attorney, and she was standing in the lobby of our estate with a briefcase containing documents that would shatter everything my father thought he knew about power and control. What she said to him that morning changed everything. But before I tell you what was in that briefcase, I need you to understand something. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Now let me take you back to where this all started. Back to late October, when my grandmother passed away and the first crack appeared in the foundation of the Castellanos family empire. My grandmother, Isabella Castellanos, died on a Thursday afternoon at Mercy General Hospital in downtown Chicago. She was 91 years old. I received the call from my mother at 3:47 in the afternoon. I remember the exact moment because I was standing in my small art studio in Pilsen, putting the final touches on a commission piece for a boutique hotel in Wicker Park. Mom's voice sounded hollow, like an echo in an empty cathedral. "Maya, it's Nana. She's gone, sweetheart." I drove the 35 minutes to the hospital through Chicago traffic that felt impossibly slow. No music, no radio, just the sound of my own breathing and the distant wail of sirens that seemed to follow me the entire way. When I arrived, my father was already positioned in the hospital corridor like a sentinel. Antonio Castellanos, 65 years old, former corporate attorney, 6 feet tall, wearing a $3,000 Brioni suit, even in a hospital hallway. He wasn't crying. He was on his phone, speaking in rapid Italian to someone about estate matters and legal timelines. I caught fragments: the trust, the properties, consolidation, timeline for probate. He noticed me and ended the call abruptly, without so much as a goodbye to whoever was on the other end. 35 years old, dark tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. One arm draped protectively around Dad's shoulders like they were posing for a campaign photo. They stood together like a fortress wall, impenetrable and exclusive. 15 feet away, clutching a paper cup of terrible hospital coffee that had gone cold in my hands before I even thought to drink it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, clinical and unforgiving. The last time I'd seen Nana Isabella, she'd been sitting in her sunroom at the Castellanos estate in Lake Forest, surrounded by her beloved orchids, gripping my hand with surprising strength for a woman her age. "Maya," she'd whispered, her accent still thick after 7 decades in America. "I have made arrangements for you. Everything is in place. You must trust me, cara mia. You must trust that I see you." I'd nodded, not fully understanding what she meant. Not yet. The funeral took place 4 days later at Our Lady of Mount Carmel, the old Italian church on the north side where 3 generations of Castellanos family members had been baptized, married, and mourned. The church was all dark wood and stained glass, white roses everywhere, a mahogany casket so polished you could see your reflection in it. My father delivered the eulogy. He spoke for 14 minutes about the Castellanos legacy, about tradition and family honor, about how my son Vincent will carry our name into the future with the strength and dignity it deserves. He mentioned Vincent by name 6 times. He mentioned my mother once, briefly, as the devoted wife who supported the family. He did not mention me at all, not once. It was as if I didn't exist. Afterward, during the reception in the church hall, one of my uncle's business partners asked me what I was doing with my life these days. Before I could answer, my father appeared beside me, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. She paints pictures for coffee shops, he said, loud enough for the small circle of people to hear. A few polite chuckles followed. It's a hobby, really, not a career. I felt heat crawl up my neck and settle in my cheeks. I was about to excuse myself when someone touched my elbow gently. An older woman I didn't recognize stood there, silver hair pulled back in an elegant twist, intelligent gray eyes behind frameless glasses, wearing a black suit that spoke of quiet sophistication. "Your grandmother spoke of you often," she said softly, her voice warm despite the formal setting. "She was immensely proud of your work, Maya. I'll be in touch very soon." Then she disappeared into the crowd of mourners before I could ask her name. I didn't know it then, but that woman was Diane Keller, and she held the key to everything that would unfold in the coming weeks. That evening, about 20 of us gathered at the Castellanos estate for a private family dinner. The estate, a sprawling Mediterranean-style villa in Lake Forest with wrought iron gates and manicured gardens that rolled down to the edge of the property like a golf course. My grandmother had purchased that house 40 years ago, with money from her own family back in Tuscany, long before she married my grandfather. The house was her pride, her piece of Italy transplanted to American soil. The terracotta tiles, the arched doorways, the library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, the garden courtyard where Nana grew tomatoes and basil that tasted like sunshine. Inside, the long dining table was set with the family's heirloom china, delicate pieces hand-painted in Florence over a century ago. Crystal wine glasses caught the light from the wrought iron chandelier overhead. A bottle of Barolo, older than I was, sat breathing on the sideboard, everything arranged to demonstrate old-world elegance and generational wealth. My father sat at the head of the table, naturally, as if the chair had been molded specifically for him over the years. He raised his wineglass, and the table fell silent. "Mama left everything in my care to manage," he announced, his voice carrying that particular authority he'd perfected over decades in courtrooms and boardrooms. "I will ensure the family assets are distributed appropriately to those who have proven themselves capable of handling such responsibility." His eyes found mine across the table. "That means you don't need to concern yourself with complicated financial matters, Maya. These things require a certain level of business acumen." Vincent nodded in agreement, his wife Gabriella adjusting the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. My mother, Rosa, studied her plate intently. She didn't look up. She never did when my father spoke. After dinner, I excused myself and went upstairs to the guest room, where I'd stayed countless times as a child. The room still had the same cream-colored walls, the same view of the garden courtyard below. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the nightstand drawer out of habit, the way you do in a familiar place. Inside was an envelope that definitely hadn't been there on my last visit 6 months ago. Thick, cream stationery, with a watermark I recognized immediately. Isabella Castellanos embossed at the top. My name written across the front in her distinctive handwriting, slightly shaky but deliberate, each letter formed with care. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I sat cross-legged on the bed I'd slept in during childhood summers and carefully opened the envelope. The room smelled faintly of lavender sachets and old wood polish, familiar and comforting. Inside were 3 items. The first was a letter, 3 pages, written on both sides in Nana's handwriting. The pen had pressed deep into the paper, creating grooves you could feel with your fingertips, as if she wanted these words to be permanent and undeniable. The second item was a partial photocopy of what appeared to be a legal document, maybe 8 or 9 pages from a much longer file. The header read, "Irrevocable Trust Agreement. Isabella Maria Castellanos, grantor." Halfway down the second page, highlighted in yellow marker, was a single line that made my breath catch. Primary beneficiary, Maya Sofia Castellanos. The third item was a small brass key, old and tarnished, attached to a tiny tag with an address written in faded ink. I read the letter with tears streaming down my face, not bothering to wipe them away. "My dearest Maya, if you are reading this letter, then I have left this world, and your father is already doing exactly what I knew he would do. I am sorry I could not stop him while I was still breathing. I tried in my own way, but men like your father do not hear women's voices, They hear only paper, signatures, and legal authority. The original trust documents are with my attorney, Diane Keller. Her office is on North Michigan Avenue. The copy I have left you here is incomplete, intentionally so. It is not enough to prove anything on its own, but it is enough for you to know I am telling you the truth. Do not show this to anyone. Not your father, not Vincent, not even your sweet mother. I love Rosa dearly, but she will tell Antonio everything. She always has. She cannot help it. Wait for the right moment, cara mia. Diane will know when that is. She has been preparing for this day for many years. You are my artist, Maya, the one who creates beauty from nothing, the one who sees what others cannot see. Do not let them convince you that you are less than you are. You have always been extraordinary. The key is for the studio. You will know which one. All my love, always and forever, your Nana Isabella. I pressed the letter against my chest and let myself cry properly for the first time since she died. The photocopy was incomplete, just fragments of a larger document. I had no lawyer. I didn't know anything about trusts or estate law beyond what I'd seen in movies. And my grandmother had been in the ground for less than a week. But for the first time in my entire adult life, I felt something shift inside me. Someone had believed in me. Someone had seen me as worthy, capable, deserving, and she'd put it in writing. Legally binding writing. I left the estate early the next morning, without saying goodbye to anyone. I just packed my small overnight bag, slipped out through the garden entrance, and drove back to Chicago before anyone else was awake. My studio apartment in Pilsen was exactly as I'd left it. Plants crowding the windowsills, easels and canvases taking up most of the floor space, the smell of linseed oil and turpentine, a half-finished painting of the Chicago skyline at sunset still on my work table. The apartment was tiny, barely 600 square feet, but it was mine, the one place in the world where nobody told me I wasn't good enough, or smart enough, or serious enough. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I Googled Diane Keller, attorney, Chicago. The results appeared immediately. A boutique law firm on North Michigan Avenue, specializing in estate planning, trusts, and family wealth management. The website showed a professional headshot of the woman from the funeral, Diane Keller, J.D., with over 30 years of experience in complex estate matters. I stared at the phone number on the screen. My finger hovered over it, but I didn't call. Because there was a part of me, the part that had been trained since childhood to doubt myself, that whispered dangerous questions. What if Nana really was confused at the end? What if this is all a mistake? What if you call and discover that the one person who believed in you was just a sick old woman who didn't understand what she was signing? I couldn't bear that possibility, not yet, so instead I threw myself into work. I had a gallery showing coming up in 3 weeks at a small cooperative space in Wicker Park, and I needed at least 4 more pieces to fill the wall space I'd been allocated. I painted for 16 hours straight, taking breaks only to eat toast and drink coffee that had gone cold hours ago. I was cleaning brushes in the utility sink when my phone buzzed with an email notification. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. Buried between a newsletter from an art supply store and a spam message about credit card offers was an email that made my stomach drop. It wasn't addressed to me. It had been forwarded to me accidentally by Vincent. The subject line read, Re Castellanos Family Trust, Petition Draft. My hands were still wet from rinsing brushes when I clicked it open. I read the first 3 lines, then had to sit down on the floor because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. Then my phone rang with a reminder about the gallery deadline, and I had to close the email and focus on work. But I'd seen enough to know that whatever my father was planning, the wheels were already in motion. 4 weeks passed. I worked obsessively on the gallery showing, finishing 7 new pieces in total. Large-scale abstract works inspired by the architecture of Chicago, the way light moved through the city at different times of day, the contrast between old brick and new glass. The opening night was small but successful. I sold 3 paintings, which felt like a victory even though the money would barely cover 2 months' rent. But the validation mattered more than the money. People I didn't know, people with no obligation to be kind, had looked at my work and decided it was worth something. The email from Vincent sat in my inbox like an unexploded bomb. I hadn't opened it again. I wasn't ready. Then my mother called. "Maya, mi amor, your father wants the whole family together for Christmas." Her voice had that particular quality it always had when she was delivering Antonio's orders, disguised as invitations. "He wants to heal the distance between us. He says family is everything." My father had never healed anything in his life. He broke things and then blamed other people for being broken. "I'll think about it, Mom," I said carefully. "Please, Tesoro. He's trying, he really is." I told her I'd let her know and ended the call. Then I sat at my small kitchen table, the one I'd found at a thrift store, and refinished myself, and finally opened Vincent's email again. I read the entire chain this time, 7 messages between my brother and my father, spanning 3 weeks, laying out a plan so calculated it took my breath away. The subject line, Castellanos Family Trust, petition draft, was exactly what it sounded like. Vincent had drafted a legal petition to file with the probate court, requesting a modification of beneficiary designation on Isabella Castellanos' trust. The grounds cited were financial irresponsibility of the named beneficiary. That beneficiary was me. The petition argued that I had demonstrated a pattern of unstable career choices, no significant assets, minimal income, and outstanding debt that made me unsuitable to manage substantial family wealth. My brother had written that about me, in legal language, for a court filing. But the message that made my vision blur wasn't the formal petition language. It was Vincent's casual comment to my father at the bottom of the email chain, typed quickly, without the legal formality of the rest. "She won't fight this, Dad. She never fights anything. That's always been her weakness. We file, we win, it's done." I sat there staring at those words for a long time. Then I took screenshots of every single message in the chain. I uploaded them to 3 different cloud storage accounts. I saved them on a thumb drive that I tucked into my desk drawer. I printed hard copies and put them in a folder. And then I called my mother back. "Tell Dad I'll be there for Christmas," I said. Mom sounded so relieved she nearly cried. I wasn't going home to heal anything. I was going home to end this, once and for all. The next morning, I called Diane Keller's office. A receptionist answered, professional and warm. I gave my name, and there was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. Then she said, "Ms. Castellanos, Ms. Keller has been expecting your call. Can you come in this afternoon?" 3 hours later, I was sitting in a corner office on the 32nd floor of a building on Michigan Avenue, looking out at a view of Millennium Park and the lake beyond. The office was elegant, but not ostentatious. Bookshelves lined with legal volumes, family law, estate planning, trust litigation. A Persian rug covered the hardwood floor. On her desk sat a framed photograph of 2 young women, maybe her daughters, smiling on a beach somewhere warm. Diane Keller sat across from me, same silver hair, same intelligent gray eyes, same calm authority. "Your grandmother retained me 23 years ago," she began without preamble. "I handled her estate planning, her property acquisitions, and 7 years ago, after a particularly difficult family gathering that deeply troubled her, she asked me to create an irrevocable trust with you as the sole beneficiary." She opened a leather portfolio and slid a document across the polished desk, the original, thick cream-colored paper, a notary seal from the state of Illinois, signatures at the bottom, official and undeniable. $1.2 million in a managed investment trust through Northern Trust Bank, Diane said. Additionally, the Pilsen studio property at the address on the key she left you, and the Lake Forest estate which she purchased in 1983 with funds from her family in Italy. The deed has always been in her name alone. Never your grandfather's, never your father's. I stared at her. The studio, the estate, everything. She left me everything. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community, so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Diane continued, her voice steady and factual, the way lawyers speak when they're delivering information that will change your life. Irrevocable means your father, as executor of the estate, cannot change the beneficiary. Any petition to modify the trust requires either your written consent or a court determination that Isabella lacked mental capacity at the time of signing. She paused, sliding another document toward me. Your grandmother anticipated this exact scenario. She had a complete psychiatric evaluation performed the same week she executed the trust. Dr. Sarah Chen, a board-certified psychiatrist with no family connections. The results are part of the file. Isabella tested well above average for cognitive function. There is no basis for a capacity challenge. I exhaled. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken in months. Then Diane's expression shifted slightly, becoming more serious. There's something else you need to know, Maya. Your father filed a petition with the probate court 4 weeks ago, requesting a change of beneficiary. He listed Vincent as the proposed new beneficiary. In his filing, he claimed he made reasonable efforts to locate you, but was unable to do so. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. We both know that's a lie. I pulled out my phone and showed her the email chain. She read it carefully, her expression never changing. But I saw her fingers tighten slightly on the edge of the desk. This is evidence of deliberate breach of fiduciary duty and possible fraud upon the court, she said quietly. If you want to contest this, you have everything you need to win. I want to contest it, I said. My voice didn't shake. Good. She nodded once, decisive. Then she said, almost as an aside, there's one more thing. Your grandmother also left you her art collection. It's stored in a climate-controlled facility in Evanston. 43 pieces, some of them quite valuable. She collected quietly over 5 decades. Your father doesn't know about it. She looked at me over her glasses. Isabella knew exactly what your father would do after she died. She spent the last 7 years making sure you'd be protected. The question now is, when do you want to act? Christmas, I said. He's gathering the entire family. 40 people. Maybe more. He wants an audience, so let's give him one. Diane studied me for a long moment, then gave a single slow nod of approval. The week before Christmas, I packed carefully. 1 small suitcase, my nicest clothes, which wasn't saying much given my budget. A leather portfolio Diane had given me, containing notarized copies of every relevant document, and the brass key Nana had left me. The original stayed locked in Diane's office safe. We'd agreed on that strategy. She would hold the master set, and I would carry certified copies that were admissible as secondary evidence if needed. I drove north from Chicago, through a landscape transformed by early winter. The suburbs gave way to Lake Forest, all decorated for Christmas with wreaths and lights and that particular kind of wealthy perfection that looks like it came from a catalog. The Castellanos estate appeared through the bare trees exactly as it always had, magnificent and intimidating in equal measure. White stucco walls, terracotta roof tiles, the iron gates standing open, as if welcoming me home. From the outside, it looked like a postcard of generational success. That was the point. My mother met me at the door. She hugged me longer than usual, the way she did when she wanted to communicate something she couldn't say out loud. Your father is in his study, she murmured against my hair. He's been in a mood all week. I carried my bag upstairs to my old room, the guest room where I'd found Nana's letter. The bed was made with fresh linens, white and crisp. The nightstand drawer was empty now. I'd taken the envelope and the key last time. From downstairs I could hear Vincent's voice, then Gabriella's high-pitched laugh, the sound of wine glasses clinking. I knelt beside the bed and slid the leather portfolio underneath the mattress, all the way to the back where it wouldn't be noticed. Then I stood at the window and looked down at the courtyard garden. Nana's tomato beds were empty and bare, the soil dark and unused. Nobody had planted anything since she'd gotten too weak to kneel. The sight made my throat tight with grief and anger in equal measure. Downstairs, the party had already begun. The family room smelled like expensive wine and wood smoke from the massive stone fireplace. My father didn't stand when I entered. He looked at me from his leather armchair and said, So you decided to come after all. Vincent was on the sofa with Gabriella, both holding wine glasses that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He glanced at my coat, second-hand from a vintage shop in Andersonville, and said, "Still driving that old Honda, Maya?" I smiled. I sat down. I said nothing. Tomorrow, more than 40 relatives would fill this house. My father had organized the largest Castellanos Christmas gathering in family history. I didn't know why yet, but I suspected that Antonio Castellanos never did anything without calculating the audience first. Christmas Eve morning, the house filled like a theater before opening night. Cars lined the circular driveway by 10 a.m. Aunt Francesca and Uncle Marco from St. Louis, the D'Angelo cousins from Indianapolis, Great-Aunt Lucia, who'd flown in from Phoenix. By noon, there were 42 people in the Castellanos estate, and the noise was overwhelming. Laughter, clinking glasses, children running through the hallways, timers beeping in the kitchen, the chaos of a big Italian family gathering. I helped in the kitchen because nobody asked me to do anything else. Rosa and Gabriella sat at the breakfast nook, sipping Prosecco, while I chopped vegetables for the antipasto platters. That felt familiar. The family division of labor hadn't changed since I was a teenager. At 5 o'clock, we gathered for dinner. The long dining table in the formal dining room seated 20. The overflow went to a second table set up in the adjoining sunroom. I was placed at the overflow table, between my 9-year-old second cousin Lucia and an empty chair that stayed empty all evening. My father stood at the head of the main table, crystal chandelier glittering above him, looking like the patriarch of a dynasty. "This Christmas is particularly meaningful," he said, his courtroom voice filling both rooms. "We've lost Mama this year, but the Castellanos family endures. And I'm especially proud of my son Vincent, who just made partner at his firm. The youngest partner in the firm's history." He turned to Vincent with genuine warmth. "To you, son. To the future of this family." Applause rippled through both rooms. Vincent accepted it with practiced humility, nodding, touching Gabriella's shoulder. From the overflow table, Aunt Francesca called out, "What about Maya? Any good news, sweetheart?" I opened my mouth to respond, but my father spoke first. "Maya is still finding herself," he said without looking at me. "She's artistic, we'll give her that. But every family needs someone to remind us what not to do with our lives, right?" The laughter rolled across both tables like a wave. Not cruel laughter, just casual amusement at my expense. The way families laugh when someone is the designated punchline. I sat there absorbing it the way I had for 31 years. Spine straight, face neutral, hands folded in my lap. Little Lucia beside me whispered, "Are you okay, Maya?" I nodded and handed her another breadstick. After dinner, after the dishes were cleared, and the panettone was served, and the limoncello was flowing freely, my father stood again. The room quieted gradually, conversations trailing off, attention shifting to Antonio Castellanos, standing beneath the chandelier like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. "One more announcement," he said. "Tomorrow morning, Christmas Day, I'll be making an important family announcement regarding Mama's estate. I expect everyone to remain here tonight and be present tomorrow at 10 a.m. He smiled, the smile of a man who has already decided the outcome and is simply going through the motions. It's what Mama would have wanted. The family together, united. I looked at Vincent. He was studying his wine glass with a small, private smile. I looked at my mother. She was staring at the table, her hands twisted together in her lap. I looked at my father. He was looking directly at me. And for just 1 second, his smile sharpened into something cold and calculated. Tomorrow, he was going to read his version of the estate distribution in front of everyone. I excused myself to help with dishes. The kitchen was warm and bright, filled with the smell of coffee and leftover food. I stood at the industrial sink, scrubbing serving platters, suds up to my elbows, still wearing the same dress I'd worn to dinner. In the next room, 42 people were laughing and drinking grappa, and not a single person had offered to help clean up. Vincent leaned against the doorframe, tie loosened, wine glass dangling from his fingers. "You know," he said casually, "you should be grateful Dad even invited you, after all the disappointment you've been." He chuckled, pleased with himself. I didn't turn around. I kept scrubbing, but something inside me, some wire that had been stretched taut for 31 years, finally sang with tension. "Vincent," I said quietly, my voice steady as a held breath, "do you know what Nana left me?" The silence behind me changed. I heard his wine glass clink against the granite counter. When I glanced over my shoulder, his face had gone very still, the smile frozen in place. He left the kitchen without another word. 10 minutes later, my father's voice thundered from the family room. "Maya, get in here, now." I dried my hands on a dish towel and walked slowly into the room. 42 faces stared at me. The Christmas tree lights twinkled in the corner, cheerful and oblivious. My father stood in the center of the room, limoncello in one hand, the other hand pointing at me, like I was a defendant he was about to cross-examine. "What did you say to your brother?" His voice was designed to make people shrink, to make them apologize before they even knew what they'd done wrong. "You're trying to manipulate this family with lies about the will?" I opened my mouth to respond. He didn't let me. "You're cut off," he said, effective immediately. "You are cut off from this family until you apologize to Vincent and stop spreading lies about your grandmother's estate. Go to your room." The room exploded. Not in defense of me, in laughter. 42 people, most of them adults, some of them elderly, laughing, because Antonio Castellanos had just grounded his 31-year-old daughter like she was a misbehaving teenager. Aunt Francesca covered her mouth with her hand, but her shoulders shook. Uncle Marco snorted into his grappa. Even Gabriella made a little gasping sound that was really a giggle. My face burned. The heat spread from my chest to my neck, to my scalp, in a wave of humiliation, so intense I thought I might be sick. I looked for my mother. Rosa was sitting in the corner armchair, staring at her hands, silent as always. Nobody said stop. Nobody said that's enough, Antonio. Nobody said a single word, except laughter. I looked at my father. His Rolex caught the Christmas tree lights as he jabbed his finger toward the stairs. "Go," he repeated. "Now." I held his gaze for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then I said in a voice so calm it surprised even me, "Okay." I turned. I walked upstairs. I closed the bedroom door behind me, and then I called Diane Keller. She answered on the second ring. I said, "Ms. Keller, I need you to bring the originals tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. There was a pause, then her steady, unshakable voice. "I'll be there." I hung up. I set my alarm for 4:30 a.m. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, listening to the laughter still floating up through the floorboards, thinking, laugh, enjoy it, because this is the last time you'll ever laugh at me. I left at 4:45 in the morning. No drama, no slamming doors, no theatrical exit. I packed my suitcase in the dark, slipped the leather portfolio into my tote bag, and walked downstairs in socks, so the marble floors wouldn't echo. The only thing I left behind was a framed photo of Nana Isabella on the nightstand. I turned it face down. I drove to a 24-hour diner near the train station and ordered coffee I couldn't drink. My stomach was too tight. I watched the sky lighten gradually from black to deep blue to gray. At 7:53 a.m., I know because I was watching the clock, my phone lit up with a text from Vincent. "Where are you? Dad is looking for you. You need to apologize before the announcement." I didn't respond. Inside the Castellanos estate, I would learn the details later from my cousin Sophia, who witnessed everything. The morning unfolded like a slow-motion car accident. My father came downstairs at 7:30, showered and dressed in slacks and a cashmere sweater, looking like a man about to chair a very important board meeting. He poured his espresso, scanned the room full of family members staying overnight, and said, "Someone wake Maya. She has an apology to make before I make the estate announcement." Nobody moved. Not because they were standing up for me, but because nobody wanted to deal with it. Antonio went upstairs himself. He knocked on the door. His authoritative knock. "Maya, it's morning. Time to face the family." Silence. He opened the door. The bed was made. The closet was empty. The room held nothing of me except the photograph of Nana, face down on the nightstand. Sophia told me later that my father stood in that doorway for a long moment, his face cycling through confusion, then anger, then something darker. He came downstairs slowly, controlled. "Maya's gone," he announced to the gathered family. "She left in the middle of the night like a coward." Vincent looked up from his phone and actually smiled. "Well," he said, "that makes things easier, doesn't it?" My father nodded. "It certainly does." Now, I was going to make the estate announcement at 10, but since the only person who might have objected has run away like a child, the doorbell rang, my mother opened it, and there on the front steps, in a charcoal gray suit with a leather briefcase and an expression of barely controlled professional fury, stood Diane Keller. "I'm Diane Keller," she said, her voice carrying into the foyer. "Attorney for Isabella Castellanos. I need to speak with the entire family immediately." The family room fell silent in stages, first the conversations nearest the door, then spreading like ripples across water until even the children playing in the corner went quiet. Diane Keller walked into that room with the authority of someone who'd spent 3 decades in courtrooms and didn't intimidate easily. She set her briefcase on the marble coffee table, right on top of the expensive Italian design books my mother kept there for show, and unclasped it without sitting down. My father stood up from his chair. He was taller than Diane by 4 inches, broader by 40 pounds. He used all of it. "Diane," he said, her first name a dismissal and a warning rolled into one. "You were not invited to this gathering. This is a private family matter." "This is the home that Isabella Castellanos purchased with her own money, Mr. Castellanos," Diane replied evenly. "And I'm here because I have a legal and ethical obligation to the beneficiary of her trust. Maya has no standing. Maya is the sole named beneficiary of an irrevocable trust executed 7 years ago. You know this because your mother informed you of it at the time of execution, against my legal advice." The room went so still, I imagine you could have heard dust settling. 42 pairs of eyes moved between Antonio and Diane like spectators at a tennis match. My mother was mentally incompetent. Whatever she signed was signed in the presence of 2 independent witnesses and accompanied by a full psychiatric evaluation confirming complete mental competency. Diane opened the briefcase and removed a thick file. "I have the documentation here, Mr. Castellanos. Would you like me to read Dr. Chen's report aloud, to everyone?" The question hung in the air. Aunt Francesca leaned forward in her chair. Uncle Marco set down his coffee cup. Even the children had gone silent. My father looked at the file in Diane's hands like it was a weapon aimed at his chest. "Get out of my house," he said quietly. "Get out now, before I call the police. You're trespassing." "Sir," Diane said, and her voice was cold as January wind off the lake. "What have you done?" The mask cracked then. Not slowly, not gradually. It split right down the center. My father stepped toward Diane. I said, "Get out. You have no authority here. This is my mother's estate, and I am the executor." "You are the executor," Diane agreed, "but you are not the beneficiary, and when the police arrive, which I encourage you to call, I will show them the petition you filed with the probate court 5 weeks ago, the one where you claimed you were unable to locate Maya, despite having her phone number, her address, and despite the fact that she was sleeping under this very roof 2 nights ago." She paused. "That's called fraud upon the court, Mr. Castellanos." Antonio's face went through a sequence of colors, red, then white, then a kind of mottled gray that looked almost purple. Around the room I could see the reaction spreading like a virus. Aunt Francesca's hand pressed to her mouth, Uncle Marco's eyebrows drawing together, cousins exchanging glances. Vincent stood up. My brother, the golden child, the lawyer, the favorite son, stepped forward with his hands raised in a calming gesture. "Miss Keller," he said smoothly, his lawyer voice, "I appreciate your concern, but whatever documents you're referencing can be reviewed through proper legal channels. There's no need for this kind of public—" "You drafted the petition, didn't you, Mr. Castellanos?" Diane turned to face him, and her voice was surgical. "You prepared a filing to modify the beneficiary of an irrevocable trust on behalf of your father, who is also the executor. The grounds you cited were Maya's alleged financial irresponsibility. I have the emails." Vincent's composure evaporated. One moment he was a confident attorney, the next he was a man whose mouth went slack and whose eyes darted involuntarily to his father. "Dad," he said under his breath, "we need to talk. Privately." Richard didn't look at him. "I have nothing to hide from this family." Aunt Francesca stood up. Her voice, when she spoke, carried decades of watching this family lie to itself. "Antonio," she said, "let the woman speak." A murmur of agreement moved through the room. Not loud, not defiant, just present, like ice beginning to crack. My father looked around and saw, perhaps for the first time, that the audience he'd assembled for his performance was no longer on his side. "This is ridiculous," my father said, but his voice had lost its courtroom resonance. It sounded smaller, thinner, like tissue paper held up to light. My father did what he always did when control slipped away from him. He escalated. "Everyone listen to me." He raised both hands, the gesture of a man restoring order to chaos. "This woman was hired by my mother when she was already starting to decline mentally. She's been filling Maya's head with fantasies about inheritance and rights she doesn't have. This is a family matter, and I will not stand here in my own home and be accused." "Antonio," Diane's voice cut through like a blade, "I served your mother for 23 years. I am not an outsider, and I am here because you violated the explicit terms of a legal instrument you swore as executor to uphold. Out." His voice cracked on the word. He pointed at the door. "Get out of this house right now, or I swear I will have you physically removed." Diane looked at him for a long moment. Then she closed her briefcase with a deliberate click, tucked it under her arm, and nodded. Not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. "I'll lead," she said calmly, "but I'll return at 2 o'clock this afternoon for the formal reading of Isabella Castellanos' trust and estate documents." She paused in the doorway. "Castellanos, I won't be coming alone." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. My father turned back to face 42 people, some confused, some uncomfortable, some like Aunt Francesca and Sophia, openly skeptical. He smoothed his sweater, adjusted his watch, and tried to reassemble his authority like a man straightening a painting after an earthquake. "I apologize that you all had to witness that," he said. "Maya hired some bargain lawyer to try to create problems where none exist. It's what she does. She creates chaos and drama because she can't accept responsibility for her own failures." He shook his head with practiced sadness. "This afternoon, I'll read Mama's will properly, the way she intended, and everything will be clear. I promise you that." Vincent sat back down and opened his laptop. Deleting things, I'd realize later. Emails. The room exhaled collectively. People returned to their coffee, their conversations, their children. The crisis had been deferred. Antonio Castellanos was still in control, or so they all believed. 2 o'clock was 5 hours away. I was parked outside a Starbucks on Green Bay Road, watching light snow begin to fall. My Honda, old and reliable and completely unremarkable, sat in the parking lot like it belonged there, which was good, because invisibility was exactly what I needed that morning. My laptop was open on the passenger seat. At 9:17 a.m., I'd sent a formal email to the Trust Services Division at Northern Trust Bank, requesting written confirmation of my status as beneficiary of the Isabella M. Castellanos Irrevocable Trust. At 10:43, the reply came from a trust officer named Robert Chang. "Dear Miss Castellanos, this email confirms that you are the sole named beneficiary of the Isabella M. Castellanos Irrevocable Trust, account number ending in 7742. The trust corpus of $1.2 million remains intact and has not been dispersed. A petition to modify the beneficiary designation was filed on November 19 by the executor, Antonio M. Castellanos, but has not been approved by the court and remains under review. Per trust terms, no disbursements can be made without your written authorization and court approval." I read it 4 times. Then I saved it, backed it up to 3 different cloud accounts, and printed a copy at the FedEx office 2 blocks away. At 12:25, Diane called. "He threw me out," she said, and I could hear something like grim satisfaction in her voice. "Threatened to call the police." "I know," I said. "My cousin Sophia texted me everything." 2 o'clock, Maya. I'll park around the corner. You go in first, I'll follow. Okay? She paused. Are you absolutely certain about this? Once it's done, there's no going back. You'll have burned every bridge. A mother and daughter walked past my car, both wearing matching red coats, laughing about something. The simple, uncomplicated joy of people who felt safe in the world. I've been going back my whole life, Miss Keller, I said. Every holiday, every phone call, every time I swallowed something that should have made me scream. I'm done going back. Then I'll see you at 2. I hung up, opened the visor mirror and looked at my reflection, pale, tired, but absolutely certain. I checked the leather portfolio one more time. Trust documents, notarized. Bank confirmation printed. Email chain screenshot and time-stamped. Nana's letter. Everything in order. Everything real. I started the engine and drove toward the estate. People were still talking, still eating leftover panettone, still drinking coffee. But the conversation had an undercurrent now. The kind of tension where everyone discusses the weather while thinking about the earthquake. Aunt Francesca cornered my mother in the hallway, outside the powder room. Rosa, she said quietly, is Antonio sure everything is in order with Isabella's estate? That lawyer this morning didn't look like someone who was bluffing. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed from crying she'd done in private. I don't know, Francesca. Antonio doesn't tell me about financial matters. He never has. Francesca looked at her for a long moment and said nothing, which from Francesca said everything. In my father's study, the room with the mahogany desk, and the walls full of legal books he'd collected over a 40-year career. Sophia could hear him through the closed door, his voice getting louder with each unsuccessful attempt. But it was the day after Christmas. Every attorney's office in Chicago had their voicemail on. Antonio Castellanos, former corporate attorney with connections throughout the legal community, could not reach a single lawyer. Vincent appeared in the study doorway. Dad, he said carefully, maybe we should postpone the estate reading. Give ourselves time to prepare a proper response. No. Antonio's voice was granite. I don't retreat. Not from Diane Keller. Not from Maya. Not from anyone. We're doing this today, exactly as planned. Vincent closed his mouth. He looked, Sophia said, like a man who just realized the lifeboat has a hole in it, and he's the one who drilled it. At 1:30 p.m., I walked into Diane Keller's office for the last time before everything changed. She had the complete dossier spread across her conference table in 5 neat stacks. I sat across from her, and she walked me through each stack methodically, the way a surgeon reviews X-rays before making the first incision. Stack 1, the original irrevocable trust, cream paper, notary seal, Isabella's signature in blue ink, steady and deliberate. Nothing like the signature of a confused elderly woman. Beside it, Dr. Chen's psychiatric evaluation confirming cognitive competency. Date stamped, countersigned, unimpeachable. Stack 2, the email chain between Antonio and Vincent, printed with full metadata. The words, "She never fights anything," highlighted in yellow on page 3. Stack 3, the letter from Robert Chang at Northern Trust, confirming my status as sole beneficiary and the intact trust balance. Stack 4, a document I hadn't seen before. Diane slid it across the table, the deed to the Lake Forest estate. I looked at her, confused. The villa, she said. Your family home. The deed has been in Isabella's name alone since 1983. She purchased the property with inheritance from her family in Tuscany before she married your grandfather. Antonio never owned it. He assumed, as men like him tend to assume, that it was his by default. Diane tapped the document. Under the terms of the trust, upon Isabella's death, ownership transfers to you. The house, the land, everything. I stared at the deed, the legal description of the property, the plot maps. My father's house, the house where he'd sat at the head of the table for 40 years, where he'd just publicly humiliated me in front of the entire family, had never been his. He doesn't know this, I said. He never read the full trust document, Diane confirmed. He read the first few pages, saw his name as executor, and assumed that meant control. He never got to page 17. I gathered all 5 stacks into the leather portfolio. Diane placed the originals carefully back in her briefcase. I go in first, I said. You come in exactly 3 minutes later. How will I know when? Diane smiled slightly. Trust me, I'll know. We shook hands. Her grip was firm and her eyes held something I hadn't seen from an adult in my family since Nana died. Respect. At 1:50 p.m., I drove down the tree-lined street toward the Castellanos estate. The snow had stopped, leaving everything covered in a thin layer of white that looked clean and new. The bare trees along the property line were sketched black against the pale sky. I drove slowly, not stalling, just remembering. This was the driveway where Nana taught me to ride a bike. The garden where she showed me how to prune rose bushes. The front steps where she sat with me after my first gallery rejection and told me that real artists get told no 1,000 times before they hear yes once. My phone buzzed. Mom. I pulled over at the end of the driveway and answered. Maya, where are you? Her voice was strained and frightened. Your father is furious. Just come back and apologize and this can all be over. Please, my amor. I'm coming, Mom, I said gently, but not to apologize. What are you going to do? The right thing, I said, and hung up. I parked behind the house, near the service entrance, where I could slip in through the kitchen. Diane's car, a silver Audi, was parked one street over. She was sitting behind the wheel, briefcase on her lap, watching through the rearview mirror. She saw me and gave a single nod. I got out of my car. I was wearing black pants, a simple sweater, my wool coat, nothing expensive, nothing that screamed confidence I didn't have. Just me, as I was. I walked through the garden gate, across the courtyard, and entered through the kitchen door that was never locked. The house smelled like coffee and the remnants of Christmas breakfast. I could hear voices from the family room, the murmur of 42 people assembled and waiting for Antonio Castellanos to tell them how the world worked. I stood in the hallway just out of sight, breathing slowly, deliberately. Through the archway, I could see the scene my father had orchestrated. The family room had been rearranged like a courtroom, chairs pulled from every room in the house, arranged in rows facing the fireplace. 42 people seated and attentive, like a jury waiting for opening statements. My father stood in front of the fireplace, reading glasses on, the tortoiseshell frames he'd worn when he practiced law. In his hand was a single sheet of paper. He held it high enough that everyone could see it existed, but low enough that no one could read what it said. Thank you all for being here, he said. As you know, Mama's passing has left certain estate matters to be resolved. I've reviewed her wishes carefully, consulted with Vincent, and I want to share with you the distribution plan she intended. He paused, scanning the room for maximum effect. The family trust will be consolidated under my continued management. The investment trust, approximately $1.2 million, will be transferred to Vincent for stewardship of the next generation. He glanced up, checking his audience. As for Maya, a merciful pause, Mama wanted her to receive a gesture of goodwill, $25,000, to be held in escrow until she demonstrates financial stability. A few sympathetic nods. Gabriella placed her hand on Vincent's knee. Vincent lowered his eyes in a performance of humble acceptance that would have won awards. Are there any questions? My father asked, confident that there wouldn't be. From the hallway, I took one deep breath. I pulled the leather portfolio from my bag, and I stepped into the room. Behind me, precisely timed, the front door opened. Diane Keller walked in. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Every head in the room turned. 42 faces, some surprised, some confused, a few genuinely pleased to see me. My cousin Sophia, sitting in the back row, gave me a small, encouraging nod. Aunt Francesca straightened in her chair, alert. My father's expression went through 3 distinct phases in under 2 seconds: surprise, irritation, then a hardening as his courtroom mask snapped back into place. Well, he said, the prodigal daughter returns. A few obligatory chuckles from relatives who didn't know what else to do. I assumed you'd run away for good. Have you come back to apologize? No, I said. My voice was level and clear. I'm here to hear the will. The real one. I walked past him, past his pointed finger, past his expensive watch, past the chair where he'd held court for 40 years, and set the leather portfolio on the marble coffee table. Diane stepped in behind me, briefcase in hand, gray suit, the quiet authority of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. "What is this?" My father's voice had an edge now, annoyance hardening into something uglier. "I told you this morning, get out. You're not welcome here." I turned to face the room, not my father, but everyone else. The family. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, "but what my father just read isn't my grandmother's will. It's not her trust document. It's a distribution plan he wrote himself. This is the original irrevocable trust that Isabella Castellanos executed 7 years ago. It was filed with her attorney, Miss Keller here, and is being managed by Northern Trust Bank. My grandmother named one beneficiary, me. Absolute silence, not polite silence, the kind of silence that fills a room when people realize they're witnessing something they'll remember for the rest of their lives." My father's face drained of color. Aunt Francesca said firmly, "Let her speak." Diane stepped forward. She opened her briefcase on the marbled table beside my portfolio and removed the original trust document. She held it up so everyone could see the notary's bright red seal from the state of Illinois against the cream paper. "This is the irrevocable trust of Isabella Maria Castellanos," she said, her voice carrying without strain. "Executed on March 7th, 7 years ago. I was present at the signing, along with 2 independent witnesses, attorney Margaret Foster and CPA David Liu, both of whom are available to testify if needed." She began to read. "The grantor, Isabella M. Castellanos, hereby establishes this irrevocable trust for the sole benefit of her granddaughter, Maya Sofia Castellanos." She paused and looked at the room over her glasses. "Trust corpus, a sum of $1.2 million, held and managed by Northern Trust Bank, Chicago, Illinois. Additionally, the real property located at 847 Forest Avenue, Lake Forest, Illinois, deed recorded under Lake County, originally purchased in 1983, shall transfer to the beneficiary upon the grantor's death." A gasp swept through the room. Uncle Marco leaned forward so far his chair creaked. Francesca closed her eyes briefly, then opened them and looked directly at Antonio. "The house," someone whispered from the back. "She left her the house," Diane continued. "As executor, Antonio M. Castellanos was given administrative authority only. He was expressly prohibited from altering the beneficiary designation, dispersing funds without the beneficiary's written consent, or encumbering the real property in any way." Diane lowered the document. "In the past 6 weeks, Mr. Castellanos has filed a petition with the probate court to change the beneficiary to his son Vincent, claiming he was unable to locate Maya." She reached into the briefcase and produced the email chain, yellow highlighting visible from across the room. "These are emails between Antonio Castellanos and Vincent Castellanos, in which Vincent drafted the fraudulent petition, and Antonio approved it." She read aloud the line that still made my hands shake. "She never fights anything. That's always been her weakness." The room turned as one to look at Vincent. My brother sat frozen, his hand suspended in midair where he'd been reaching for his wine glass. His face had gone ash gray. Gabriella slowly, deliberately removed her hand from his knee and folded both hands in her lap, creating distance. Aunt Francesca shook her head. Uncle Marco muttered something in Italian that I didn't catch, but understood from the tone. Sophia stood up from her chair in the back and walked forward to stand beside me. She didn't say anything, just stood there, present. My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "She was confused at the end," he said, but the words came out thin and unconvincing. My mother didn't understand what she was signing. Diane's response was immediate. "Your mother's psychiatrist, Dr. Sarah Chen, conducted a complete cognitive evaluation the same week as the trust execution. The results are documented here." She placed a medical file on the table. "Isabella Castellanos scored in the 95th percentile for her age group. She was cognitively sharper than most people in this room." A long beat of silence. Then, from the back of the room, Great Aunt Lucia, 84 years old, Isabella's younger sister, who had barely spoken 2 words all weekend, said quietly, "Isabella told me about the trust when she made it. She said Antonio would try to take it from Maya. She said that's why it had to be irrevocable. She knew everyone. She always knew." My father looked at Lucia, then at Francesca, then at the 42 faces that were no longer looking at him with respect or deference. They were looking at him the way you look at something that's been rotting underneath a pretty surface. He had assembled his own audience, and they had become his jury. My father turned on Vincent. The alliance they'd built over 35 years collapsed in a single moment. "Say something," Antonio's voice cracked open. "You're the lawyer. Contest it. Do something." Vincent didn't move. He sat on his chair, laptop balanced on his knees, and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, irrevocable means irrevocable. You can't contest it. I told you that from the start. I told you this was risky. You told me she'd never find out," my father hissed. And there it was. In front of 42 witnesses, my father had just confirmed every detail Diane had presented. The plan, the deception, the assumption that I was too weak to fight. A wine glass slipped from someone's hand, I never learned whose, and shattered on the marble floor. Dark red liquid spread slowly across the white stone, and nobody moved to clean it up. Then the performance changed. My father's shoulders dropped. The aggression drained away. In its place came something I'd seen him use 1,000 times before. On anyone who cornered him. He softened his voice. He lowered his hands. He turned to me with manufactured emotion. "Maya, sweetheart," he said, and the word felt like a slap. "I was only trying to protect the family's assets. You're young, you don't have business experience. You don't understand how complex these financial instruments are. I did this because I love you." I looked at him, this man who'd called my career a joke, who'd seated me at the overflow table, who'd publicly cut me off at 31 in front of the entire family, who'd told a court he couldn't find me when I'd been sleeping under his roof. I let the silence hold for 5 full seconds. Then I said, "You didn't do this because you love me, Dad. You did this because you've never believed a daughter deserves the same as a son. That's not love. That's control. That's contempt." I hadn't noticed her crying, but her face was wet, mascara running in dark tracks down her cheeks. She looked at my father, the man she'd been silent beside for 37 years, and said in a voice that shook but didn't break, "You owe her more than an apology, Antonio. You've owed her a lifetime of respect you never gave." The room held its breath. My father looked at my mother as if she'd spoken in a language he didn't recognize. Then he looked at me, then at the 42 faces watching him. He said nothing. He turned, he walked out of the room and into his study. The door closed with a decisive click. In the minutes that followed, the room rearranged itself. Not the furniture, the people. The invisible lines of allegiance that had structured every Castellanos gathering for generations shifted quietly and permanently. Aunt Francesca reached me first. She pulled me into a tight hug that smelled like Chanel and espresso. "Your Nonna would be so proud of you, Tesoro. So incredibly proud." Sophia squeezed my hand. "You're the strongest person in this family," she whispered. "You always have been." Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years came forward. A handshake, a nod, quiet words. "I'm sorry, Maya. We should have said something years ago." Not everyone. Some stayed seated, uncomfortable. Some stood and left quietly, not in protest, but in the way people leave when something breaks and they don't know how to fix it. Vincent stood. He didn't look at me. He took Gabriella's elbow and guided her toward the door. Gabriella paused in the foyer, reached up, and removed her diamond earrings, dropping them into her purse, as though she wanted to make herself smaller, less visible, less associated with what had just happened. Diane was already organizing documents back into her briefcase. "I'll file the petition to remove your father as executor first thing Monday morning," she said to me quietly. "The court process takes about 45 days. In the meantime, the trust is frozen. No changes, no disbursements without court approval." I nodded. The family room was slowly emptying. The Christmas tree lights still twinkled in the corner, oblivious. The marble floor was still stained with spilled wine. The whole confrontation had taken 53 minutes. 31 years of silence, answered in 53 minutes. Monday morning, Diane Keller filed 4 documents with the Cook County Circuit Court. The first was a petition to remove Antonio M. Castellanos as executor of Isabella's estate, citing breach of fiduciary duty, failure to notify the beneficiary, misrepresentation to the court, and attempted unauthorized modification of an irrevocable instrument. The second was a request to appoint Diane as interim executor until I could designate a permanent replacement. The third was a formal complaint with the Illinois State Bar against Vincent R. Castellanos, alleging violation of professional conduct rules by drafting a fraudulent petition to benefit an immediate family member, while concealing a clear conflict of interest. The fourth was a restraining order preventing my father from accessing or entering the Lake Forest property. Within 3 weeks, the court granted the governor's removal on an emergency interim basis. Antonio didn't contest it. His attorney, a man named Harrison from a mid-sized firm downtown, advised him bluntly that he had no legal standing. Irrevocable means irrevocable, Mr. Castellanos, and the documentary evidence against you is overwhelming. If you fight this, you'll lose and spend $100,000 finding that out. The trust was transferred to an account in my name. Robert Chang at Northern Trust called personally to confirm. The deed to 847 Forest Avenue was updated. My name replaced Isabella's as owner. The villa, the gardens, the courtyard where Nana grew tomatoes and basil was mine. Vincent received a formal notice of investigation from the Illinois State Bar. The process would take months, but the outcome was predictable: a 1-year suspension of his license for ethical violations. His largest client, a commercial real estate development group, dropped him within 2 weeks. He quietly transitioned to corporate consulting, work that didn't require a law license or courtroom appearances. My father called me once, 5 days after the filing. I answered, because some part of me still hoped he might say the words. He said, "You've destroyed this family, Maya. Everything we built." I said, "No, Dad. You destroyed it. I just finally had the paperwork to prove it." He hung up. I haven't heard from him since. That was 8 months ago. 3 weeks after the court order, I drove to the Lake Forest estate with a single brass key that Diane had handed me across her desk. "It's yours now," she'd said simply, and for some reason those 2 words broke something open in me that I hadn't known was still closed. I parked in the circular driveway, the same driveway where I'd played as a child. The gardens were bare, winter dormant, but I could see the potential underneath. Everything Nana had built, waiting to wake up again. I turned the key in the lock. The door opened, and the smell hit me first. Wood polish, old books, a trace of the lavender sachets Isabella kept in every linen closet. The house was silent in a way I'd never experienced before. My father's presence had always been the dominant frequency, his voice filling every room, his opinions occupying every conversation. Without him, the house breathed differently. It breathed like it was resting. I walked through each room slowly. The family room where 42 people had watched my life change. The dining room with the table still bearing faint water rings from Christmas wine glasses. The kitchen where I'd stood alone, scrubbing dishes, while my family laughed in the next room. Upstairs, my old bedroom. The guest room where I'd found Nana's letter. Isabella's master bedroom, her reading chair still positioned by the window, a stack of Italian novels on the side table, her reading glasses folded on top. Then the garden. I stood at the back door and looked out at what had been Isabella's sanctuary. The raised beds were overgrown and brown. The stone paths she'd laid by hand were barely visible under dead leaves. The fountain was dry, silent. I knelt on the cold ground, pressed my palms flat against the earth, closed my eyes. "I'll fix it, Nona," I whispered. "I'll bring it all back." And I knew with absolute certainty, the kind that only grief and love and good soil under your fingernails can give you, that I would. A week later, on a Saturday morning cold enough to see my breath, I drove 2 hours west to a small town I'd never heard of before I found the second key Nona had left. The Pilsen studio she'd mentioned in the trust turned out not to be in Pilsen at all. It was in a tiny art community called Riverside, in a converted warehouse building overlooking a frozen river. The key opened a door on the third floor. Inside was a space that took my breath away. Exposed brick walls, huge industrial windows flooding the room with north light, the kind artists dream about. And covering every wall, stacked on the floor, leaning against exposed beams, were paintings. 43 of them, just as Diane had said. But they weren't just any paintings. They were works by artists I'd studied in school. A small Agnes Martin, a Helen Frankenthaler study. 2 pieces by contemporary Chicago artists whose work sold for 6 figures at auction. On a work table in the center of the room sat another envelope. Maya, if you're reading this, you were brave enough. I knew you would be, though I worried sometimes. This studio is yours. The paintings are yours. Sell them if you need to. Keep them if they inspire you. But most importantly, use this space to create. You are an artist, Karamia, a real one. Not because I say so, but because you see the world differently, and you have the courage to show people what you see. That courage is rare. Don't waste it trying to please people who will never be pleased. The world needs what you make. I am so proud of you, today and always. With all my love, your Nonna. I sat on the floor of that studio and cried. Not sad tears, release. The kind of crying that opens something instead of closing it, that leaves you lighter instead of heavier. I stayed there until the winter sun set and the room filled with blue shadows, surrounded by artwork and possibility, and the echo of my grandmother's belief in me. That Sunday night, back at the Lake Forest estate, my house now, I sat at the long dining table and wrote an email. Not long, not dramatic, just clear. To Antonio Castellanos, Rosa Castellanos, Vincent Castellanos. I don't want to cut anyone out of my life. That was never the goal. But I will not return to relationships where I'm diminished, dismissed, or treated as less than. If you want to have a relationship with me, it will be on terms of mutual respect. But you have to choose to walk through it. My mother called 17 minutes later, crying. Real tears, not anxious ones. I'm so sorry, Maya. I should have protected you. I was afraid of him. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. I know, Mom, I said gently, and I don't blame you. But I need you to start choosing what's right instead of what's easy. Can you do that? A long pause. Then, I'm going to try, mi amor. I really am. Vincent replied 3 days later. 2 words. I'm sorry. I read it, set the phone down, and didn't reply. Sorry was a start, but it wasn't the same as accountability or change. He'd either get there or he wouldn't. That was his work, not mine. My father didn't respond. Not that week, not the next month, not ever. The silence was its own answer, familiar and final. Antonio Castellanos had been silent about the things that mattered my entire life. At least now, I'd stopped waiting for him to speak. 9 months have passed since that Christmas. Spring came to Lake Forest, and Nana's garden is coming back. I've spent countless hours on my hands and knees, clearing, pruning, planting. The tomatoes are thriving. The herbs smell like sun and earth. The fountain runs again, the sound of water a constant, gentle music. The roots were deeper than I'd expected, stronger than they looked. They survived years of neglect. They just needed someone to clear away the dead weight and let light back in. I understand that feeling. I used a portion of the trust to pay off my student loans. $38,000, gone. The most satisfying check I've ever written. I opened a small gallery in the Riverside Studio building, Castellanos Contemporary, featuring my work and other local artists. My name on the door. Nana's name, really. The name means something different to me now. The Lake Forest estate has become both home and creative space. I converted my father's study, that room with the mahogany desk and the law books, into my primary painting studio. I replaced his legal volumes with art books and filled the shelves with canvases and supplies. It felt right. Like rewriting history, one brushstroke at a time. Sophia comes by most weekends to help with the garden. Aunt Francesca calls every Sunday at 9 sharp. Just checking in, she says, and then would talk for an hour about everything and nothing. My mother visits twice a week now. The first time she came without my father, she stood in the doorway for a long moment, as if asking permission. I hugged her, and we planted tulip bulbs side by side without saying much. Antonio rented a condo in the city. I hear through Francesca that he tells people I manipulated Nana, that the trust was Diane's scheme, that the court made a mistake. The story changes depending on who he's talking to. But it always ends the same way. Antonio Castellanos is the victim. Some things, I suppose, are truly irrevocable. Vincent's bar suspension ended 3 months ago. He's working for a logistics consulting firm now. He and Gabriella separated quietly. I heard through Sophia that they're divorcing. He hasn't contacted me since the "I'm sorry" text. I left the door open, the way I said I would. I'm just not standing in the doorway waiting anymore. I'm telling you this story from the studio in Riverside. It's Saturday afternoon. The river outside is flowing, ice-free and alive with reflected sunlight. I come here 3 days a week when I need to remember what quiet sounds like, what creating without judgment feels like. The studio is exactly as Nana left it, except I've added my own work to the walls. A series I'm calling Inheritance. Large abstract pieces about legacy and breaking free and the weight of family expectations. I'm not telling this story to give advice. Every family is different, every dynamic unique. I can't tell you what to do with your father, your mother, your inheritance, your silence. I can only tell you what I did and what I learned. Here's what I know now. Silence isn't agreement. I spent 31 years being quiet, and the people around me mistook that silence for consent, for weakness, for acceptance. It was none of those things. It was a woman gathering evidence, building strength, waiting for the right moment. Waiting isn't weakness either. My father and brother counted on the idea that I wouldn't fight back. What they didn't account for was that there's a difference between someone who can't fight and someone who's choosing when to fight. Timing matters, preparation matters. And the most important thing, the thing that changed everything, my grandmother didn't leave me money, she left me proof. Proof that someone saw me, the real me, and decided I was worth protecting, not with words or promises, but with documents and legal structures and the kind of love that plans 8 years ahead. That's the inheritance that saved my life. Not the money, not the property, not the art collection, the knowledge that I was worth the trouble, that I deserved the effort, that someone believed in me enough to build something permanent and unbreakable to protect me. I still think about that Christmas Eve, the laughter when my father cut me off, the humiliation burning in my cheeks, the feeling of being utterly alone in a room full of family. I think about it, and I'm grateful for it. Because that moment of absolute clarity, when I finally understood that waiting for them to change was never going to work, that was when I finally chose myself. Early morning, Lake Forest. The garden is alive with summer now. The soil is rich and dark from months of care. The tomatoes are heavy on the vine, the basil is full and fragrant, and somewhere in the oak tree at the property line, a bird is singing a song that sounds like joy. I'm on my knees in the dirt, planting seeds for fall vegetables, kale and Swiss chard and winter squash, things that get sweeter after the first frost, things that get stronger from hardship. The morning sun clears the roofline and falls across the garden in long golden bars. Somewhere in the house, my coffee is getting cold. Somewhere in the city, my father is waking up in his condo, probably still telling himself a story where he's the hero. Maybe someday he'll stop. Maybe not. That's not my responsibility anymore. I stand up, wipe the dirt from my hands, and notice something on the front steps. An envelope. No stamp, no return address, just my name written in careful handwriting. I open it and find a card, printed inside, just one line. I'm proud of the woman you've become. Love, Mom. I fold it carefully and tuck it into my pocket next to the letter from Nana. The one I carry everywhere. The cream stationery with the blue ink and the words that changed everything. 2 letters, 2 women, one who planned ahead and one who's finally catching up. I walk back into my house, the house my grandmother built, the house my father lost, the house that was always meant for someone who would love it and tend it and fill it with art and life and truth. And for the first time in 31 years, it feels like coming home. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If this story touched something in you, if it made you feel seen or understood or less alone, then it did exactly what I hoped. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. There's another story waiting in the description below, and I think you might need to hear that one too. I'm Maya Castellanos, and this was the last time I ever sat at the children's table.